Thanks for that great video, Sophia. Excellent work. And thank you so much to May and Ariella for their really informative and great talks tonight. Before I start, I do want to talk about a bit this video. So on Saturday at 4 o'clock at Grand Central Station, we are going to shut shit down.
Shut shit down.
We shut shit down. So if y'all want to come out, that would be excellent. 4 o'clock, Grand Central. Something to do after the Women's March, which we will also be mobilizing for, but I will get into that in a minute. I have been asked tonight to speak on women, and actually more specifically feminism and imperialism. It's a subject that I take great interest in. So hopefully this is great. And I'd also like to just thank comrades, women in the party, for consulting with me about this talk, and also for sharing with me some of the stuff that was written by the party, some of the founding members, including Dorothy Ballin. So I'd like to start off with a quote. "He who has the key to Chase Manhattan Bank also has one for the church, the schools, and all other institutions." Dorothy Ballin, a founding member of Workers' World Party, wrote this insight as part of the pamphlet Feminism and Marxism, an attempt by this party, Workers' World Party, to reconcile women's liberation with our line when the modern-day women's liberation movement erupted during the late 1960s and early 1970s. The 1960s and 70s, of course, saw great gains for the status of women, with abortion being legalized in 1973. Younger comrades cannot discount how important this was for women. 1 in 3 women alive today will have an abortion. Imagine having one outside of the legal medical system, with back alley procedures, no pain medication, outrageous costs, unsympathetic doctors, etc. It's estimated that 5,000 women died every year from a botched abortion in the United States before the procedure was made legal. That's 5,000 dead women every year. Now, thank goodness, it's something that we don't have to speak about with shame. Why do I bring this up in conjunction with the topic tonight, feminism and imperialism? Well, as Ballin points out in her pamphlet, this development cannot be separated from the rest of the women's liberation struggle. Even though women are able to get abortions today, they cannot do so in a widely available way. While New York City is quite the haven for women's health care, in the South and Midwest, women have to sometimes cross state lines to get access to safe and legal abortion. And they most usually have to run a gauntlet of abusive people who hold signs of aborted fetuses, take photos of women as they go in, shout, grab, and generally try and terrorize women away. Laws vary from state to state, but in general, it's not something that's still super easy to get. Abortion doctors and nurses and staff are threatened, attacked, and even murdered in this country with impunity. We can see that even though abortion has become legal, the material basis of obtaining abortion remains one that's fraught with anxiety and concern for many people. We can treat the symptoms of a disease, but without finding a cure to the root cause, we are stuck fighting a hydra of oppression. In 2003, I had my first encounter with anti-imperialist feminism. There was a group called RAWA, Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan. While their politics may not be our own, I was struck at the time by their insistence that the United States not bomb Afghanistan. They were a main source of information in the news for the atrocities that the Taliban would commit against women in the country, but then they were also against the war. Of course, in the Western media, women in Afghanistan were portrayed as animals who were oppressed by savages, with no context whatsoever except racist tropes that were against the Arab. Of course, there are no Arabs in Afghanistan. The women in Rawa, the women who had attended university, the women who worked in the opium fields, all of these women were erased under the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. The U.S. media held high the banner of women's rights in that country while the women themselves were being burned alive at wedding parties by U.S. drones, blown apart by bombs, poisoned with depleted uranium. The irony was not lost on me, but it seemed to be rather lost on the capitalist media. Dorothy Ballin writes of 2 lines on women's liberation. The first line is where the locus of women's oppression is something that is inherent in men. The liberal bourgeois feminist writes on patriarchy as an embedded character structure, the primary social and political distinction as opposed to what we would believe in, which is wealth or rank. The only way forward, according to the liberal bourgeois feminist, is through human growth and true re-education. This, to me, is bourgeois thinking at fever pitch. As if it is my responsibility, as if it is a woman's responsibility to change individual minds on an individual basis. As if once men stop making sexist jokes in front of me at work, I will automatically get a pay raise and get easier access to abortion. Patriarchy is a foundational piece of capitalism and imperialism in its reflection in sexist jokes, sexual violence, sexual objectification, and commodification is a critical part of reproducing women's oppression, but not the whole piece of it. Women cannot hope to achieve liberation by correcting the behavior of men. Women can only hope to achieve liberation through the revolution of our entire society, for all social relations to erupt. As Balin writes again, quote, when the production relations of a given society are no longer compatible with the social relations, which really belong to a previous epoch, the social relations burst asunder. Then comes a period of revolution, first of all in the consciousness of the oppressed. This means, back to imperialism, that women here need to understand that their liberation is tied to the liberation of women abroad. That white women understand that their liberation is tied to women of color. That cis and straight women understand that their liberation is tied to trans and queer liberation. Even privileged, well-to-do women have their liberation as women tied to the liberation of poor and working women. Yes. Women must understand that just because Hillary Clinton runs for president, this does not mean that sexism is over, for God's sake. Hillary Clinton stands for the capitalists and the imperialists, not women. Even then, a significant part of her advancement remains attached to the presidency of her spouse, Bill. Speaking of which, I remember Madeleine Albright saying that it was worth it to kill 500,000 Iraqi children with sanctions. This too is Albright standing for capitalism and imperialism. Same thing with Condoleezza Rice, who was Secretary of State under George W. They might appear powerful in their positions. They might seem to be breaking through glass ceilings, but they are only allowed to do so if they are willing to represent the interests of capitalism and imperialism here and worldwide, which lends itself to deepening women's oppression abroad. Because any and all advancements in women's situations must necessarily represent a major threat to the capitalist mode of production, we are given, of course, the watered-down variety. While Me Too was a major campaign that helped raise consciousness among a broader sector of women in society, the bourgeois media seemed to forget the fact that this hashtag originated 10 years ago with Taryn Burke, a black woman who wanted to reach women of color who were victims of sexual assault. Was this just an unfortunate oversight? I think not. Why was it that Me Too only got the worldwide attention that it deserved once the main focus was mainly on white female actors in Hollywood? The most oppressed of our class are women of color, trans women, and queer and gender nonconforming women, poor women who face all forms of sexual oppression on the job, on campuses, and elsewhere. While it was indeed satisfying to see Harvey Weinstein dragged for his crimes, what's going to happen to the manager who used to grab my ass at work when I was 15 years old? Liberation for women must mean liberation for all women, and this can only be accomplished necessarily by smashing capitalism and imperialism once and for all. I'm not sure if this audience needs a lecture on the materialist and historical roots of women's oppression, but I'll sum it up anyway. People aren't born sexist, they're taught to be sexist. Media reinforces the inferiority and weakness of women, and all feminine qualities, which is why femmes in general are oppressed, are chalked up to a biological inferiority to cis men. Isn't it ironic when men call other men pussies, which is meant to be an anti-woman slur? If people really stop to think about how strong a pussy is, all the pain and challenges it goes through in this life, they might think twice about it. But it's no mistake that women are seen as subhuman. It's the only way to chain us to unpaid labor that we all do as part of our economic relations with others. Women were once leaders of pre-class societies, were seen as doctors and healers. There had to be a concerted campaign to demean them, to strip them of their power. It happened, as I've said from this podium before, to witches in Europe, but continues across the world wherever capitalism puts its foot. I remember how shocked I was to see skin lightening cream for the first time, always advertised for women. I remember how shocked I was to see virginity cream for women on sale, a caustic substance that women were supposed to put on their vaginas to cause them pain and swelling. I remember speaking with Palestinian and Soviet women about how the advent of capitalism to them meant the immediate importation of violent pornography. These are necessary cultural components to the subjugation of women for the purpose of capitalist relations. Yet so is Lara Logan, a white South African journalist who represents the superiority of feminism in the West when confronted with the masses at Tahrir Square, where she said she was assaulted by 300 men for 25 minutes. The disappearance of thousands of Egyptian activists as a result of the US-backed counter-revolution was hardly covered, while her assault was delivered as proof positive that the Arab man was an animal. So are a whole host of white female writers and journalists and TV stars that use their privilege to travel abroad and paint societies as backwards and strange. I'm sure it even happened with the so-called masculine woman from the Soviet Union and Chairman Mao's China. Women in FARC today are described as having quote-unquote jungle fever. It becomes clear what sort of woman earns the title of free and safe in our bourgeois capitalist media. It is the one who is wearing a bikini, not the fatigues or chador, or the hijab, and is on the side of imperialism, not on the side of the world's oppressed majority. Take Ahed Tamimi, for example. She is from a family, yes, for Ahed. Take Ahed Tamimi, for example. She is from a family of incredibly strong women. Her courage in the face of Israeli occupation has been documented since she was a small girl. Now 16, she will soon spend her 17th birthday in the prisons of her occupiers. These prisons are staffed by women. The gun held to her back is sometimes held by women. The Israeli Defense Force brags it is one of the most inclusive occupying armies on the planet, with women, trans and cis, queer and gender non-conforming women, and even vegans being allowed to oppress Ahed Tamimi. As anyone can tell you, the racism in the IDF is intense in and of itself. But this is not the smiling face that Israel presents to the world. It is worth noting that the last woman I saw who openly supported Donald Trump in public was a white woman at the Jewish Defense League counter-rally to trying to shut down the rally that we were having for Ahed Tamimi. And she was holding a Women for Trump sign the entire time. Where to begin with this? To paraphrase Dorothy Ballin again, women's liberation will never be run by mere re-education, human understanding, and the practice of nonviolence. No wonder it is this version of feminism, this liberal bourgeois version, that is so palatable and promoted by the ruling classes. Women's liberation must be anti-imperialist. A white woman cannot go into a black neighborhood to solve sexism. Condoleezza Rice cannot go to Iraq to liberate women. Some feminists believe that we can effectively fight the signs of patriarchy without addressing its root cause, but we as Marxists know this to be untrue. It's only by uniting with our sisters around the world to overthrow this capitalist system, to end imperialism once and for all, that we can even begin to think about an end, a real end to women's oppression. So this is a message that the Women and Workers' World Party want to bring to the J20 March on Saturday, to say that revolutionary struggle is the antidote to women's oppression, not the march to the polls that the Democratic Party wants us to take. More like a gang, what do they call it, the gangplank? Or the, what is it that they walk? Right. So anyway, we hope that many of you here will be able to join us. We will be meeting in this office, I believe, at noon. Am I wrong, Tony? It's noon? Yeah. At 12 o'clock on Saturday, to be able to bring materials up to the Women's March and also to stand near the exit of the Women's March and try and encourage many of these women who will be in the march to please come and join us in our militant anti-capitalist struggle against Donald Trump. Fuck Trump. Fuck, yeah, that's it.